Shalom, all praises, blessings, glories, and honors to Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Bahashem, Racha Kodash. Double honors to my elder apostles and bishop elders of Great Millstone, who have taught me this truth, as well of men of like mind. Shalom wa chasad, which means peace and mercy, to the elect of the nation of Israel, whom are you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native American Indians, and Israelite foreigners of the sea land of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whom are scattered here in America, which is Babylon the Great, and abroad. To you I say Shalom, and Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Ratazah. This lesson is edifying and informative. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 6. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself a thick clay. In the news from the RT, global debt balloons to record highs. Is now 45 trillion higher than its pre-pandemic level, and is expected to continue growing rapidly, the top trade body has warned. The global debt pile increased by 8.3 trillion in the first quarter of the year to a near record high of 305 trillion amid an aggressive tightening of monetary policy by central banks. The Institution of International Finance, IIF, has revealed. According to its global debt monitor report on Wednesday, the reading is the highest since the first quarter of last year and the second highest quarterly reading ever. The IIF warned that the combination of such high debt levels and rising interest rates had pushed up the cost of servicing that debt, prompting concerns about leverage in the financial system. With financial conditions at their most restrictive levels since the 2008-09 financial crisis, a credit crunch would prompt higher default rates and result in more zombie firms, already approaching an estimated 40% of U.S. listed firms, the IIF said. Despite concerns over a potential credit crunch following recent turmoil in the banking sector of the United States and Switzerland, government borrowing needs to remain elevated, the finance industry body stressed. According to the report, aging populations and rising healthcare costs continue putting strain on government balance sheets, while heightened geopolitical tensions are also expected to drive further increases in national defense spending over the medium term, which would potentially affect the credit profile of both governments and corporate borrowers. If this trend continues, it will have significant implications for international debt markets, particularly if interest rates remain higher for longer, the IIF cautioned. Read more. EU countries' debt hits historic high. The report showed that total debt in emerging markets hit a new record high of more than 100 trillion, around 250% of GDP, up from 75 trillion in 2019. China, Mexico, Brazil, India, and Turkey were the biggest upward contributors according to the IIF. As for the developed markets, Japan, the US, France, and the UK posted the sharpest increases over the quarter. It said. This concludes the article. In other news, also from the RT, UK warned about food inflation shock. Rising food prices will be a bigger shock than energy costs, the Resolution Foundation said. Rising food prices will soon overtake energy costs as the main force fueling inflation in the UK, an independent think tank warned in a report on Friday. Food makes up a far larger share of the typical household's consumption than energy, says the Resolution Foundation, whose aim is to improve living standards for those on low to middle incomes. As grocery prices will remain at a high level with energy costs decline, this summer food costs will have overtaken energy bills in the scale of the shock they are administering to family finances, the think tank predicted. So many are expected to experience severe food shocks due to current extreme financial conditions that will only continue to worsen. And this is all through the spirit and power of Yahweh Bahashim Yahweh Shai. The Lord is setting the stage for extreme judgments, especially here in America, Babylon the Great. For Jacob's trouble is right around the corner. And 2/3 who say, according to Amos chapter 9 verse 10, that the evils, which the word evil means bad time. Eve means time and ill means bad. So the bad time shall not overtake nor prevent us. That is what they say. Prevent them from doing what? From indulging continuously, even as I speak, in their lusts, in sin, in iniquity, which is sin upon sin. And what is sin? 1 John chapter 3 verse 4 tells us that sin is transgression of the law. Reading on, grocery bills have jumped by almost 20% during the past year. Official figures for March showed, with the overall consumer price index standing at 10.1%. Energy prices peaked at record levels last year, but have since declined significantly. Apart from energy, food cost increases in the UK have been attributed to factors such as supply chain disruptions caused by the conflict in Ukraine, Brexit-related trade barriers, rising labor costs, and bad weather. These and other factors mean that factory gate prices and the resultant retail prices for consumers could continue to rise into the summer, the think tank warned. It's far from clear that political and policy debates have caught up to the scale of what is going on, the report added. The Bank of England expects inflation to fall quickly this year as a result of hikes to its key interest rate, which is now at 4.5% from 2%. And the fall in wholesale energy prices. It says the regulator's target inflation is 2%. The annual inflation rate for the UK is expected to be 6.1% this year. It is expected to be. But we shall see what the Lord wills. This concludes the article. In other news from the BBC, U.S. debt ceiling talks hampered by serious differences. So there's been a stall in talks to raise the ceiling, which is deadline is June 1st, which is not too far away. White House and Republican negotiators have resumed U.S. debt ceiling talks after a brief pause on Friday that rattled financial markets. And this was published one day ago. House of Representatives Speaker Kevin McCarthy said negotiations at the Capitol were back on, and so negotiations are back on after their brief pause. But the White House warned of serious differences, yet they still remain divided as they are quoted to be serious differences. So there are obviously impediments, okay? Republicans had suspended talks hours earlier, accusing the White House of unreasonable requests. Without a deal, the U.S. could default on its $31.4 trillion, which is equivalent to 25.2 trillion pounds, actually euros, debt. Now, this is why I read the scripture in the book of Habakkuk earlier. That debt is that thick clay. Again, let's read Habakkuk, pardon me, chapter 2, verse 6. Shall not all these, and who are the these referring to? Well, when we read the verse above, we see that the these is referring to the nations. Verse 5, they also, because he transgresseth, Esau Edom, he transgresseth by wine through his democracy, through his philosophies. He is a proud man. Now the keepeth at home, who enlargeth, and how does he keepeth at home? Because he goes about these different countries, establishing military bases, businesses. Okay, watch a documentary entitled The Confession of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. Who enlargeth his desire as hell, right? Because he cannot be satisfied. His desire is so enlarged, it is as hell. Hell cannot be satisfied, and hell is the grave, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied. But gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. And so now we understand who the these are. So shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, woe, which means destruction, to him that increaseth that which is not his. Why? Because he's been going about these different nations with an enlarged desire that cannot be satisfied, for it is as hell, okay, being insatiable, taking all their resources, and taking what is not his. How long? So how long is he going to continue to do this? How long is Esau going to continue to do this to us? Is what these nations are saying. And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay, right? So even they see and even they know that this country is in great debt. Now let's go into the word thick clay. Ibat yat, thick clay, weight of pledges, heavy depths. Pledging of goods, hence load of debt. So this man has loads of debt, heavy debt. Now the word ladeth is from the Hebrew word kabod, which means to be heavy, be weighty, be grievous. be hard, be heavy. To be heavy. To make heavy. In a bad sense, burdensome, severe. Now, the word burdensome means troublesome, weighty, worrisome, severe, strenuous, uphill, difficult. So this man is burdensome. He is heavy with thick clay, with heavy depths. Severe. And this man is also known for setting these different nations up and putting them in depth as well, while he himself is in extreme depth. To make weighty, abounding with, more grievously afflict. To be heavy, weighty, burdensome. So this man's in great depth, who later himself, who is heavy, in great depth. Now let's look at a different version of the scriptures in another Bible version. Let's read the NLT. It says, "But soon their captors will taunt them. They will mock them, saying, 'What sorrow awaits you, thieves? Now you will get what you deserve. You've become rich by extortion.'" See that? So they've become rich by extortion. Again, watch the Confession of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. But how much longer can this go on? This is the ESV. "Shall not all these take their taunting or their taunt against him with scoffing and riddles for him, and say, 'Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own'? For how long? And loads himself with pledges, with debt. He's heavily laden with thick clay, with debt. 31.4 trillion. And that's just the debt, but it's actually more. Now let's read on. It says that would mean the government could not borrow any more money or pay all of its bills because he's too heavily in debt. Who laded himself with thick clay. The Treasury Department has warned that a default could begin on 1st of June. Speaker McCarthy told Fox Business on Friday evening, "We'll be back in the room tonight. But it's very frustrating if they want to come into the room and think we're going to spend more money next year than we did this year. That's not right, and that's not going to happen." So the Lord has hardened McCarthy's heart. Let's see what happens. Will they finally not raise the debt ceiling? Because they usually do. Well, let's see what the Lord has in store this time. He said he had not spoken to President Joe Biden, who is attending the G7 summit in Japan, and will be back in Washington on Sunday after cutting short his foreign trip. Garrett Graves, the lead Republican negotiator, told reporters they had a candid discussion about realistic numbers, a realistic path forward, and something that truly changes the trajectory of this country's spending and debt problem. The White House suggested the two sides were still some way from an agreement. Speaking at a news conference in Hiroshima, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said, "We have serious differences, and this is going to continue to be a difficult conversation that's not lost on us." She also questioned whether congressional Republicans were serious about wanting to cut the deficit and reaching a reasonable deal. Failure to raise the debt ceiling from its current limit could see the U.S. suspend its social insurance payments and the salaries of its federal and military employees. The fault also threatens to wreak havoc on the global economy, which is already well over as we had read the earlier article, well over $305 trillion in debt. It says, affecting prices and mortgage rates in other countries. The pause, in the talks earlier on Friday was widely regarded as a negotiating ploy in Capitol Hill, but U.S. financial markets flinched at the development, closing in negative territory that afternoon. The Dow ended down 0.3%, the S&P 500 dipped 0.1%, and the Nasdaq slipped 0.2%. In exchange for support for raising the debt ceiling, Republicans are demanding budget cuts to the tune of $4.5 trillion, which includes scupping several of Mr. Biden's legislative priorities. The White House has called the Republican proposal a blueprint to devastate hard-working American families, although it has indicated in recent days that it may make some budgetary concessions. Both President Biden and Speaker McCarthy are under pressure from the left and right flanks of their respective parties to hold the line. In a one-seat Democratic majority in the Senate and Republicans in narrow control of the House, a deal has so far proven elusive, and with the clock ticking, the two parties remain far apart. Patrick Mahaney, a North Carolina Republican who is also involved in the talks, told the Wall Street, Journal early on Friday that negotiations were at a very bad moment. Mr. Biden has argued that raising the debt limit and reducing the budget deficit should be two separate issues, but also 6 in 10 Americans disagree, according to a new Associated Press NORC poll. And here we have a chart of the U.S. debt. The U.S. debt has risen regardless of administration. And right now the debt is over 30 trillion. So with that, I will conclude this lesson. Abaratazai, it has been informative and edifying. Shalom to the elect. This has been another in the news.